打造。再开始发言。虚会忏悔，亦待一切众生惭愧忏悔，所有任妄为真，生生世世追随烦恼，效真烦恼，自控自惑，自残自害的恶业因缘习气与诸恶誓愿。惭愧忏悔，亦待一切众生惭愧忏悔，所有的随声妄想、造作妄语，乃至形成坚固的万事的恶业因缘习气与诸恶誓愿。祈愿仰仗三世三宝及一切诸佛肆意解脱境界菩萨摄持，速证妙观察智，尚能如所如所观察所有妄想感觉业障，观察它的升起、发展、消亡的详细现象，念念知道它是那么虚无缥缈，知道它是一切苦的根本。从此菩萨被它牵引着，毫无意义的追随，去造让自己受苦的业。当下即能知情，当下即能做到，不思议分别世间业果，正生三整相续，三缘淡故，三因不生。心真眼若达多狂现自歇，即证菩提，并愿一切众生同步皆得。感恩上师佛的狮子吼，祈愿一切众生皆能具足因缘和能力，闻师说法，因机醒悟。恒依佛智，念念觉悟，事事觉悟，时时觉悟，处处觉悟。愿此誓愿等真如，具足极大的欢喜心大勇猛精进力，不乱专一的念，固定成自己的一部分，生成智慧巧妙结合正生根基。感恩上师佛以此堪忍世界真的慈悲陪伴，但誓愿快速圆满具足您这样的便如风的耐性，与我等此恶有情真，难行能行，能为说法。但惭愧忏悔，亦待一切恶有情众生惭愧忏悔。由于欲尽起诸伪顺，尽被爱心而生增记造整整业，乃至于上师三宝所背信弃义，无惭无愧，无有功绩，诸障所缠，轮回生死，水中捞月万万年，生生世世追逐了虚无缥缈，劳民伤财，耗神费力，苦乐无常，颠倒无尽，没意思。感恩上师佛的狮子吼，祈愿一切众生皆能具足因缘和能力，闻师说法，因机醒悟，恒依佛智，念念觉悟，事事觉悟，时时觉悟，处处觉悟。誓愿尽未来给予上师三宝的善因缘，如同真如自性，永恒清净自在，坚固不坏。与诸佛及佛所认可的善知识，善因缘如同真如自性，永恒清净自在，坚固不坏。感恩上师佛的慈悲摄受，感恩所有善因缘没有舍弃我。惭愧忏悔，亦待一切众生惭愧忏悔。犯病了还不自知的无名愚痴，祈愿一切众生皆能闻师说法，因机醒悟。但今节誓愿具足因缘和能力速证，如所如说，随教而行。于诸和尚20里所，尚能感恩欢喜的恭敬供养。尊重赞叹，随教而行，出舍强妄，速速教诲。于正法真升起要想，于和尚20里所升起佛想，于自身所起病人想，于说法者起名因想。为积佛法不爱生命，于诸财物一波之余起劳结想。世事一碗法是要但这个病经者是愿感恩欢喜的僧一种服药，远程离垢得法眼镜，托念力福福归元真。发本名药，摩尼宝珠死一线，逍遥自在为法王。愿此誓愿等真如具足极大的欢喜信心大一梦心经力，不乱专一的念，固定成自己的一部分，生成智慧巧妙巧正生根基。好，我们现在昨天呢，我们有在探究到，昨天我们探究到了自身免疫系统的一些疾病，从荨麻疹啊，荨麻疹我们探究到它是一种自身免疫系统的一种疾病，然后我突然发现，竟然找到国卫生局里边一个是自体免疫疾病。好，我们现在一起来学习一下啊。
anyone with an autoimmune disorder, or for that matter, any inflammatory disorders. Now, of course, the thing to do if you have an autoimmune condition is go to the experts, right? So this is what they will tell you what to do, right? Consume plenty of fruits and vegetables and whole grains, legumes. Only have moderate amounts of alcohol. Limit your sugars and sodas, and also limit your refined grains. But of course, the diet is going to recommend you can have some sugars, juice and alcohol and sugar and fine grains. Just don't have too much, and you'll be totally fine. Well, I'm going to let you know right now. Uh, you will never, ever get better if you follow that recommendation. So let's go ahead and dissect and talk about what's really behind an autoimmune disorder. Most autoimmune disorders, where your own cells are attacking itself, creating a lot of collateral damage with inflammation, start in the gut. But I want to talk about the mechanism of what starts it. In the gut, we have this immune barrier, okay? We also have other barriers on their skin, the internal skin. We have other immune things like acids in your stomach, bile that's produced by the gallbladder, lactic acid that's produced by some of your microbes that all prevent pathogens from invading the body. And we also have this thing called the blood-brain barrier, which protects pathogens from invading the brain. And so the immune system, and I just have to say this, is so highly complex and so mysterious. Really, no one understands the complexity of this magical defense mechanism and how amazing it is. And when you appreciate it, you're much less susceptible to using things to try to bypass your immune system, like antibiotics, for example, or anything to stop an infection. You want to let your body learn from it and develop more immunity. But before we get into this, I want to just touch on something that's really important. It's about the immune system. Since we're on the topic of autoimmune, our immune system is developed when we're small infants. Hopefully you had a natural childbirth, you weren't C-section, because that can inhibit the starting of the immune system because of the microbiome that's developed in a natural birthing process. And hopefully you were breastfed too, because of the probiotics that are in the breast milk really fortify that immune system early on. When we talk about a fetus growing in a mother's womb, it's not a sterile environment. They did think it was sterile at one time, but they recently found microbes in the amniotic fluid. And some babies actually have their first bowel movement right inside the womb, and they found microbes in there. Where do they come from? Well, they came from the mother. And so an infant's immune system starts at birth. And if they don't have these certain factors, okay, if things are too sterile, if an infant is exposed to antibiotics or anything that can inhibit that microbiome, boy, is that immune system affected later on in life. And the recent interest that I have in this topic relates to farming and growing certain plants. And I'm going to be doing some very interesting research on my farm relating to this topic. But a seed that is grown in the soil is not just a little packet of genetic information. It is literally Noah's Ark. You have all sorts of microbes growing inside that seed and on the surface of that seed that helps that seed be fortified in its growing process. And so they found that if you disrupt that microbiome early on, that plant won't really grow. It won't really have that microbiome to help it absorb nutrition. Well, the exact same thing happens with us, with our immune system early on. We're talking about the gut barrier, okay? There are these protective things called tight junctions that keep the cells very, very, very tight and secure. So it forms a very, very nice barrier between the inside of your body and the outside of the body, or really the inside of the gut. So if there's a pathogen trying to invade the gut, these tight junctions prevent it from doing so. Now, the medical term for this is intestinal permeability. Of course, it's the same thing as a leaky gut, right? There's holes in your intestine that allow things to pass through that then don't get the stamp of immune approval through immigration, and then certain things can be tagged incorrectly, and then your immune system can go after them, and then we have a war, we have inflammation, and then we can develop autoimmune diseases. Now, there's this protein that regulates these tight junctions, and if this zonulin and the tight junctions are not working correctly, the immune system's not going to have the ability to differentiate. We're talking about the gut barrier, okay? There are these protective things called tight junctions that keep the cells very, very, very tight and secure.
我们在这里，
of genetic
我们在
information. It is literally
我们在这里就是固化一下哈，因为之前我们一直在强调说那个面粉里面有一种叫溶液的东西，就会让肠漏。这里就讲到你看哈，他讲到那个肠漏的这个原理。
Noah's Ark. You have all sorts of microbes growing inside that seed and on the surface of that seed that helps that seed be fortified in its growing process. And so they found that if you disrupt that microbiome early on, that plant won't really grow. It won't really have that microbiome to help it absorb nutrition. Well, the exact same thing happens with us, with our immune system early on. We're talking about the gut barrier, okay? There are these protective things called tight junctions that keep the cells very, very, very tight and secure. So it forms a very, very nice barrier between the inside of your body and the outside of the body, or really the inside of the gut. So if there's a pathogen trying to invade the gut, these tight junctions prevent it from doing so. Now, the medical term for this is intestinal permeability. Of course, it's the same thing as a leaky gut, right? There's holes in your intestine that allow things to pass through that then don't get the stamp of immune approval through immigration, and then certain things can be tagged incorrectly, and then your immune system can go after them, and then we have a war, we have inflammation, and then we can develop autoimmune diseases. Now, there's this protein that regulates these tight junctions, and if this zonulin and the tight junctions are not working correctly, the immune system's not going to have the ability to differentiate between self and non-self. In other words, your immune system can make a mistake and start incorrectly assigning your own tissue being a foreign pathogen and start developing antibodies, whether it's for the thyroid, the brain, anything. And so this zonulin protein is always elevated in autoimmune diseases as well as a lot of inflammatory conditions. It is the primary regulator of that intestinal permeability. So if we look at what foods are best for an autoimmune disease, it would be those foods that reduce permeability and that keep this zonulin in check and prevent it from getting too high. So what I did is I cross-referenced a lot of different foods and other things that relate to not only increasing or decreasing zonulin, but also affecting the intestinal permeability, as well as directly causing autoimmune diseases, okay? So the number one thing that helps regulate zonulin is your own microbiome, okay? So anything that destroys your microbiome is going to be very, very bad for the situation. Anything that supports it is going to be very, very good. And again, we come full circle to these microbes, right? They're not us, but they live with us and they greatly help us. A very large portion of our immune system is due to these microbes. And I really think if we look at the difference between like 50 years ago and now, we definitely do not have the numbers and the diversity of microbiome in our guts. And we definitely don't have the numbers and diversity of microbiome in the soil. I think that is really at the core of the problem. So the first food I'm going to recommend is a probiotic food, right? That would be sauerkraut, kimchi, kefir, okay? Anything that will give you these friendly microbes. And you might even want to take a probiotic as well, because we're trying to increase the diversity of microbes. Now, if we take on the flip side, I think we should also talk about what to avoid. Well, guess what? Antibiotics. Antibiotics directly increase leaky gut. Okay, they increase this zonulin and they directly relate and can cause autoimmune diseases. So at the first sign of a sickness, don't jump to start taking that antibiotic. And if you have to, okay, definitely take a probiotic at the same time. It's so important. I mean, the amount of antibiotics that I've taken in my life are just off the charts, simply because I didn't know the long-term effects. Did you realize that when you take an antibiotic, there are going to be certain microbes that are going to survive that are going to develop a resistance to that antibiotic? That microbe that now is resistant to that antibiotic can do something called horizontal gene transfer, where it shares this information with other microbes that were not exposed to that antibiotic, to give them the genes that help them resist that antibiotic in the future. So these microbes can share information back and forth, and this is part of the survival mechanism that they have developed. And so the next time you take the antibiotic, it works less and less, to the point where it won't work at all. Another food that is good potentially for autoimmune would be anything fermented. Okay, fermented. I'm not talking about like fermented like beer or alcohol. I'm talking about like fermented vegetables, because fermented vegetables are easier to digest. They have microbes. They have the fiber that can actually feed the microbes. They have all sorts of other secondary chemicals that support keeping that intestinal line really, really tight. But if you have the type of autoimmune that involves damage to your gut, there's too much inflammation, then you might have a problem with vegetables in general. You might have to do carnivore for a little while. But if you don't have that, you might benefit from fermented vegetables. And this also includes vegetables, okay? Because personally, I do very well on them. I don't apparently have that much gut damage that it's a problem. Some people don't. But if you have an autoimmune disease that's affecting the gut, you might not do well on vegetables. But if you don't, vegetables can contribute to a good gut microbiome because they feed the microbes from the fiber, but also the phytonutrients in these vegetables greatly support zonulin. And one of the biggest ones that is very well researched is sulforaphane. And not only broccoli sprouts, but in broccoli, cabbage, and other cruciferous vegetables. So sulforaphane directly helps reverse gut dysbiosis, okay, alteration in the microbiome. Sulforaphane is a great remedy for H. pylori, another microbe in your body that is in the stomach that can get out of control and turn unfriendly in certain environments, and then it can create ulcers. But guess what? Sulforaphane can help kill H. pylori and put it back into remission. Sulforaphane helps the mucus lining in your gut, and sulforaphane directly inhibits autoimmune conditions, okay? Especially like lupus and even psoriasis and other autoimmune conditions. So you could probably get the most sulforaphane in broccoli sprouts. And you can just put that on your salad each day. Or you can get sulforaphane in a supplement. All right, let's go to the flip side, what to avoid, okay? Anything with the herbicide glyphosate, and this is in the Roundup Ready and in GMO foods. And if you look this up, it's interesting because you'll see these mixed reviews. Of course, the ones that they say that glyphosate is fine are funded by companies that have a vested interest. But if you think about it, glyphosate has a patent on it being an antibiotic. Yeah, because it kills microbes. Certain things you'll see on the internet will say that there is no dangers to glyphosate in humans because the pathway that biochemically it interrupts is not part of the human body. Well, it is part of the microbes that live inside of our gut that we depend on. So it definitely affects us from the microbiome level. But glyphosate is in so many different things, even in non-GMO things, including wheat and other grains, not to mention soy, corn. It's just all over the place. And so now I think it's appropriate to bring up another really bad thing for autoimmune diseases, and that would be gluten in certain grains, okay? Gluten is a kind of a general term for several types of proteins that have a very devastating effect on our GI system. Now, you might think just about celiac, which is a very severe disorder, which is not as common as other disorders. But then you also have gluten intolerance, gluten sensitivity, which is pretty common. But what about for those people that don't have a problem with gluten, right? Well, check this out. Gluten, whether you have an intolerance or not, gluten is going to increase zonulin in everyone. So it's going to open up those tight junctions in people that are not sensitive to it. And the big problem with gluten is that it's the only protein that our bodies cannot fully digest, okay? So if we get this undigested protein floating down our GI tract, and then it opens up the hole in the gut and it goes right through. Now we're going to start to have immune reactions, or at least inflammation, especially if you're consuming it on a chronic basis, which most people are. And unfortunately, lately in the last 20 years or more, gluten has really increased in wheat and in other foods. And so you can imagine the amount of inflammation going on in our guts without us even knowing it. All right, let's talk about number 4, okay, the food that you should be consuming. Food, and this is kind of just a general category, but foods high in glutamine, okay, glutamine. Maybe you've heard of this, maybe you haven't, but glutamine is a good thing to reduce inflammation in your gut. Now, glutamine is an amino acid that is a precursor for glutathione, right, which is one of the most important antioxidants in your body. And so what foods are high in glutamine? Well, red cabbage. And by the way, cabbage is just good for any type of gastrointestinal problem. Grass-fed beef, eggs, fish, these are all really high in glutamine. Now, on the flip side, additional things you should avoid would be, of course, glucose, fructose. Both glucose and fructose increase zonulin and increase permeability. Alcohol is another one that will just put a hole right through your gut. And of course, vegetable oils, another big one, like corn oil, soy oil, cottonseed oil, canola. These vegetable oils are highly inflammatory and they definitely will create increased permeability. And of course, trans fats are also really bad for the intestinal lining. And number 5 food would be the omega-3 fats. And that's another category that includes, cod liver oil, fish, salmon, sardines. Omega-3 is really good for the gut and keeping those junctions really, really tight, as well as reducing the risk for autoimmune. Now, this last part is very, very important too. And this is not foods, it's just nutrients. And these nutrients that I'm going to talk about are hands down the most important nutrients to support the zonulin, to support autoimmune, to support the gut lining to make it really, really tight, okay? We have zinc, vitamin D, vitamin A, which is in egg yolks, beef liver, butter, things like that. So now you have the basic information on what you should be consuming if you have an autoimmune disease. And since we're on the topic of the gut, another really important video for you to watch would be my more comprehensive video on the digestive system. And I put that up right here. Check it out.
那我们再看一下这个。
So apple cider vinegar apparently has some really great effects for many things, including skin disorders like eczema, which is an inflammatory skin disorder, which actually originates from the gut.
Foods that can kill
if there's a
like
permeability
sugars,
issue,
the
let's say
refined
there's leaky gut,
carbohydrates like grains,
then there's certain
refined
things that can
oils
get
like seed
in through
oils.
those
No, I'm going to
holes
talk
and
about some
create
other
an
foods
immune
that
reaction.
I haven't talked about in the past. I think you're going to find this quite interesting. So the first food that can kill you is basically consuming a puffer delicacy called. Today we're going to talk about the 6 foods that can kill you. Okay, now I'm not going to talk about the obvious foods that can kill you, like the refined sugars, the refined carbohydrates, like grains, refined oils, like seed oils. No, I'm going to talk about some other foods that I haven't talked about in the past, and I think you're going to find this quite interesting. So the first food that can kill you is basically consuming a puffer fish. It's a Japanese delicacy called fugu. Now, these Japanese chefs have to go through special training to have a special license to be able to cook this food correctly, because the lethal dose is so tiny. It's like a drop of a pinhead that can actually kill 30 people. And if you don't prepare this correctly, this toxic chemical called tetrodotoxin, which is a neurotoxin that will paralyze your lungs, accumulates in the ovaries, the intestines, and the liver of a pufferfish. And it's 1,200 times more lethal than cyanide. So be careful the next time you consume pufferfish. All right, number 2, the death cap mushroom. Now, there are a number of deadly mushrooms out there, but death cap is number 1. In fact, 90% of all deaths from mushrooms come from this death cap. And this can happen either consuming it raw or cooked. And the most deadly toxin of several of the toxins in this mushroom is called alpha amanitin. And what it does is it starts creating necrosis of the liver and eventually the kidneys. You start off with jaundice and then seizures, and then you go into a coma, and then you die. And if somehow you live, they can do a liver transplant, but it pretty much destroys your liver. Check this out. This is what happens. The first stage does not begin until 6 to 12 hours after ingestion. Often the foragers comment how good the food tastes, and there's no signs of any problems for at least 6 hours. After the silent phase, it is followed by an onset of nausea, abdominal cramping, and profuse watery diarrhea. A physical exam may reveal some dried mucosal membranes and even tachycardia, which is higher pulse rate, and even low blood pressure. But after the GI phase, the second stage appears where the patient appears to recover momentarily and the GI symptoms resolve. But ongoing liver damage continues. This stage may last 2 to 3 days and is characterized by higher liver enzymes, higher bilirubin, and liver swelling. In the third stage, both the liver and the kidney function become compromised, and there are more and more laboratory signs of liver damage, and death occurs within 3 to 7 days. Now, this is interesting. There's an antidote that you need to know. There's actually 2 antidotes. One is called NAC, which you may be able to get over the counter as a supplement. I think you can, at least in the US, because NAC eventually turns into glutathione, but honestly, that's not the best antidote. The best antidote is milk thistle. Now, if you look around my farm right now, milk thistle is all over the place. It has these purple flowers, pricker bushes, and this little white look like parachute type things at the top with these little seeds. There's something in the seeds that are the antidote. And there's a certain doctor, which I'm going to put the link down below, who developed what's called the Santa Cruz protocol, in which he injects people with the extract from milk thistle to help protect the liver. And so if you're out and about somewhere and you just have this urge to consume a mushroom and you find out it's the wrong one, you better find some milk thistle really quick and start chewing on the seeds immediately. Okay, number 3, the Korean baby octopus. Now, the Korean baby octopus has these tentacles, and certain people that eat these sometimes get them prepared. They're still writhing around like they're still alive. Well, the suction pads can still work, maintaining suction. Even if you start chewing them, they can actually get stuck to the roof of your mouth and even in your throat. So basically you choke and you die because you can't breathe anymore. So again, if you have the temptation to consume Korean baby octopus, take this into consideration. The next food I'm going to talk about is the green potatoes. If you happen to see a potato and there's some green stuff on it, don't eat it. It has this toxic compound called solanine, which, by the way, is colorless, and cooking it does not destroy this poison. Between 200 and 400 milligrams can kill an adult, but only 20 to 40 milligrams can kill a child. The next thing I'm going to talk about is consuming raw commercial chicken. Like, let's say you buy some chicken breast, bring them home. You have to be careful because there's a higher level of this Campylobacter bacteria as well as salmonella many times in this chicken. And so if you're picking up the chicken and even washing it, some of the residue, some of the bacteria can get on your hands or the cutting board, and you can get very sick, and you could even die from the salmonella poisoning. In fact, there's over 450 deaths per year of salmonella poisoning. Initially, you might get abdominal cramping, diarrhea, nausea, but some people don't survive. Depends on their immune system. Now, I do want to make note of these 2 microbes that could be in our body, okay, at any one time. And Campylobacter bacteria many times lives in our body and it doesn't bother us. Just like E. coli, it can live in our body and it doesn't bother us. It doesn't irritate us unless we piss it off by taking something to irritate it and make it thrive. And so you have other microbes that help to keep these microbes in check, like lactobacillus. This is why there's so many side effects from having antibiotics and also consuming animals that have been fed antibiotics. In fact, 80% of all the antibiotics are fed to animals, unfortunately. So you always want to make sure you buy your food or your meats without antibiotics. And the reason for that is that if you go to the farmer's market and you're buying a chicken from them that's from a really great environment, chances are you're not going to have the severity of these pathogens compared to the commercial type of chicken farming that they do in these large barns. The point is that if you buy very inexpensive commercial chicken, you get what you pay for, it's not quality, and you can be at risk of getting some of these microbes in your body, and it can be potentially deadly. So if you happen to consume that, you better make sure that you thoroughly wash your hands and keep things very, very sterilized, and also keep things very, very cooked. Don't eat raw chicken. And the last thing I want to talk about is things with cyanide in them. You have the pits or the seeds of apples, of peaches, of pears, apricot pits, bitter almonds, and even cassava has cyanide. And so chances are you're probably not going to die if you consume some of these things, but if you're chronically consuming them, it can build up and it could create a problem. Even smokers, like tobacco naturally has cyanide. So if you're a chronic smoker, right, you're constantly getting this cyanide and it starts to shut down the mitochondria, the energy factory of the body. And a couple little symptoms that could occur when you're consuming a bit of or being exposed to cyanide on a chronic basis or the smoking is visual problems, hearing loss, poor muscle contraction. But there is an antidote. Methylene blue is something they use in emergency rooms to counter both cyanide poisoning as well as carbon monoxide poisoning, because methylene blue cleans up some of these electrons that are escaping from the mitochondria. And so it's like a sponge and allows the oxygen to work better in the mitochondria. Now, because of the censoring and the suppressing of the algorithms on YouTube, it's becoming more difficult to find my content. And there's a lot of content that I cannot put on YouTube, unfortunately. So to make sure you have full access of
我们抓紧时间，我们再熏一
you
下这个
may
关于
never
面
eat
粉
bread
这一块。
again after watching this video. That even at hinting at this idea of taking away someone's bread can stir up a lot of upset, emotion, resistance, etc. But I just want to challenge you to watch this video, because the question is, why do people love bread so much? I mean, what is it about the bread that is so special that people like so much? Well, you're about to find out that there is a huge push to get everyone on this planet to eat more grains. The problem is we're already eating too many grains. There's a new term I want to introduce to you called health washing. Health washing is a term to describe giving certain claims to foods that are not necessarily true. I mean, everywhere you look, grains are natural, they're wholesome. Whole grains are a part of a healthy diet. I mean, they're high in fiber, which they actually are not as high in fiber as other foods. They're loaded in vitamins and minerals, and we won't talk about the anti-nutrient called phytase that blocks those minerals. And grains are heart healthy, and they can even help you lower your belly fat. But the problem is that most of these studies are surveys, they're questionnaires, they're not peer-reviewed, placebo-controlled clinical trials. And if they are, they're industry-sponsored studies. The point is that when we're continually told to consume 6 to 11 servings of grains as our foundation for our diet, one half of them being whole grains, the other can be refined grains, that's a tremendous amount of carbohydrates that are introduced to our diet. But today I'm going to talk about just one little tiny aspect of bread. Okay, I'm not going to talk about how it turns into sugar and it can cause weight gain. I want to focus just on this one little thing called gluten. Okay, now what is gluten? Gluten is the protein in a lot of grains, okay, especially wheat. And gluten is a term to describe various proteins within this category. And one of the proteins is called gliadin-derived opioid peptide. Okay, now what the heck is that? That is a protein that can create an opioid effect. So in other words, it can mimic morphine to a certain degree. Now, what are the effects of opioids? Well, right now we have a major problem around the world with opioid addiction and synthetic opioids, where it literally, like fentanyl, destroys people's lives. It's highly addictive. So just one thing an opioid will do is it'll increase endorphins, okay? Endorphins are internal body chemicals that make us feel good, that can help decrease pain, okay? And our bodies make endorphins. There's another term I want to introduce to you called exorphins, okay? An exorphin is an endorphin that can be triggered by food, okay? You consume certain things and it creates an endorphin effect. Now, this is very important to know because this is why you like bread so much. Bread stimulates endorphins. It gives you this euphoric feeling. It can stimulate appetite. That's why they serve you the bread before your meal. So you'll be hungrier and want to order more food. And so the reason why people love this bread is because it's altering our chemistry. It's increasing our endorphins, okay? Now, the problem is that it comes with a little bit of a package. You may have heard the celiac disease, which a person has a severe reaction to gluten, okay, in the GI tract. They're going to get the classic symptoms: diarrhea, bloating, and abdominal pain, okay? And a lot of other conditions too, like inflammation in the gut, eventual atrophy of the little villi or the little internal roots on in your small intestine that are supposed to help you absorb food. Those become smaller and smaller to the point where they're just no longer there. So you have a major digestive problem. And the problem with celiac is it's very hard to diagnose unless you do a biopsy. And so you might say, well, I don't have celiac. I don't get diarrhea, bloating, abdominal pain when I consume bread. So what's the big deal? Well, there's something called non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And this is basically asymptomatic celiac. In other words, a person will have celiac without the symptoms of the digestive tract, at least without classical symptoms: diarrhea, bloating, abdominal pain. But they have other issues, okay? Because the problem is still occurring at your gut level. The damage is still being done on these villi. You're getting inflammation, you're getting atrophy that will eventually show up in other problems down the road. But you may not experience really any symptoms when you have bread. But what I want to do is I want to expand your awareness on some other symptoms that you may be experiencing that are connected, that you might not think are connected. Let's first talk about the mental connection, how it can affect your mental state. Well, first of all, it can create symptoms like ADD, depression, anxiety, and even autism. And I will put that research down below. It can even lead to things like schizophrenia, which I will put that study down below as well. The other problem is a permeability issue in your gut. So you've heard of leaky gut, right? Well, that is a condition where you have holes in your gut that's created by the inflammation because there's so much omega-6 fatty acids in bread and grains. Like if we were going to compare omega-3 to omega-6, it's like 1 to 22. So in other words, there's 22 times more omega-6 fatty acids than there is omega-3. So there's a lot of inflammation going on, which is going to create holes or permeability issues in your lower gut. And when you have holes, you allow proteins to go through and you create all sorts of immune reactions. And then you create allergies and eventually autoimmune problems, especially of the thyroid, like in Hashimoto's. And then another one is psoriasis, okay, which is an autoimmune condition. So we get damage to our intestine, and then we start getting malabsorption. We no longer absorb certain things, and that leads to vitamin and mineral deficiencies and a whole cascade of additional problems, which I'm not going to get into. Another common symptom is insomnia, which leads to fatigue. You may have brain fog. You may also become anemic because you can't absorb iron. And it can lead to digestive problems like GERD, which is a severe acid reflux, and headaches and migraines, and the list goes on and on and on. Now, sometimes when people live in America, they consume like a pizza, for example, and they feel very bloated, but then that bloating goes away. And maybe they go on a trip overseas. Maybe they go to Italy and they eat a pizza, but they don't react. And they're wondering, why can I eat grains in certain countries, but I cannot consume them in other countries like America? Well, one of the reasons is that when you ferment grains into bread or pizza dough or whatever, the fermentation, the microbes actually eat the protein. They start reducing the gluten considerably. So for example, sourdough bread has a lot less gluten as other breads. And this is why they might not experience the bloating. And so in America, the way they make bread is they don't ferment it for 2 or 3 days. They maybe ferment it for like an hour or so. And so we retain the gluten. So the more gluten that a grain product has, the more you're going to have a problem with this. Now, the other point I want to bring up is that over the years, we've hybrid different grains like wheat to have more gluten, okay? And this is one additional problem. And then there's also additional problems too when you enrich or fortify these flour products, especially bread, with synthetic vitamins and iron. A lot of people react to that as well. Now, the point I'm trying to make is that I'm just taking one aspect of grains, and that's gluten. But there's a lot of other additional problems as well. But I think even when people go off grains and they start the ketogenic plan, one huge reason why they might even feel so much better is not even necessarily the lowering of the carbohydrates. It is the abstinence of eating these grains that eliminate a lot of the inflammation that is going on in the gut and then all the associated symptoms. So I want to challenge you just to avoid eating bread, okay, for 1 week, okay? In fact, avoid all grains for 1 week and just see how you feel. And then the next week, go back to eating bread and grains and then see how you feel. And then compare these two and then decide whether it's worth it or not. Now, if you have not seen my video on sugar and how that affects the red blood cell, that's a real interesting video. I'm going to put that one up right here. Check it out.
OK，我们现在还有一点时间，那这些视频里面呢，你们看到哈，我们还可以再看一个，你们想看哪一个？刚才呀，我们有看过了关于免疫系统的食物，然后呢，我们这个肠漏就是造成免疫系统的那个自体免疫系统疾病的一个原因。然后你看哈，我们天天接触到的那个面粉里面就有这些的，造成这个大风险啊。在面粉这一块，我们现在能从里面脱离出来，我们就尽量从里面脱离出来了。还有一点点时间，我们可以再看一个，你们看得到吧？看得到吗？看得到我这个页面吗？看到。哦，这里是第一名消炎止痛药自然疗法，我们看看哈。
I want to give you the best thing to do if you have pain or inflammation, the COX-2 inhibitor or some other pain medication. So first, let's talk about what COX-2 means, okay? This is an immune response, whether it's in response to an injury for a healing response, or it's to attack a microbe to kill it. And so they created these COX-2 inhibitors that block that inflammation. And a lot of people take them from pain. A lot of people take way too many of these medications and they have a lot of side effects. Inflammation, typically, when it starts, is actually a good thing. But the problem is when the inflammation is not appropriate anymore and it's become chronic. That's when we need to get rid of it because this inflammation can literally dissolve your bones, destroy your joints, create massive degeneration within the body. And also, cancer tends to follow into areas of inflammation. So typically people take for a COX-2 inhibitor, Tylenol or aspirin or even Vioxx, which was taken off the market. Before I get into what I think is one of the best natural COX-2 inhibitors, I want to just briefly mention this one topic, which is your genetics. Fairly recently, they've discovered genetic weaknesses for inflammation and pain. And so I listed a whole series of genes that if you have a specific problem with these genes,
you may, if the triggers are there, have more pain, more inflammation than someone who doesn't have a problem with these. And the reason I'm even bringing this up is because I had a DNA evaluation, and apparently that is my weakness. I have a lot of problems with the genes that I'm showing you right now. So, for example, if I over-exercise, for example, or do the wrong type of exercise, I will just end up with inflammation for a long period of time. If I have some dental work, the inflammation will linger for a lot longer. If my diet is not right, now it is, but in the past it wasn't right, I will just fill up with inflammation, which explains all the inflammation I had through my spine, through my hands when I was in my 20s and early 30s. So these are genetic problems that you need to be aware of because you can do something about them. And I'm going to give you a whole list of generally what you can do to keep these genes off. Okay, so they're not excessively producing too much inflammation. So you don't necessarily at this point need to go get a test. I'm just going to show you what to do. And they're triggered by various things. We'll talk about that. But let's first cover the main topic that I promised I would talk about, which is the best natural COX-2 inhibitor that I think can help you with your pain or inflammation. And it relates to aspirin. The way they discovered aspirin is through a natural plant called willow bark. They isolated a certain compound in willow bark, which is a very potent COX-2 inhibitor, okay, an anti-inflammatory, an anti-pain, anti-fever. And this compound is called salicylic acid. But what's interesting about willow bark, you might just think you could just take some willow bark and take a little bit and it should just get rid of your pain. And it might. Now, the question is, if aspirin was created from willow bark, why don't doctors just recommend willow bark? Well, there's not a lot of money in it. And of course, it's not going to be studied because you can't necessarily patent it. And so they're not going to promote it. If you have something that's synthetically made by a certain plant compound, you can, control the dosage and sell it for a lot of money. The problem with aspirin is it comes with a package. It has side effects. It destroys the mucosal lining in your GI system. It has been known to cause ulcers and bleeding and thin your blood. But willow bark doesn't do any of that. It won't alter the mucus lining in your gut. It won't thin your blood. It has very minor side effects, if any. You don't get a lot of this salicylic acid, okay? You get byproducts of that, which are not necessarily even the reason why you're going to get rid of inflammation. These phytonutrients are just amazing. You have flavonoids, you have polyphenols that have various properties to get rid of pain. Now, in the studies that I'm going to talk about, which I'm going to list down below, you're going to need between 120 to 240 milligrams, okay, in order for it to work. And sometimes you may need to take it for several days, up to a week, to see the effects. But just to remind you, there's going to be no effect on blood thinning or blood clotting. There's no change in the GI mucus layer. And with these other compounds, because we're dealing with a complex of many different things, we're not just dealing with one isolated factor, you can get a nice inhibition of COX-1 and COX-2 and many other effects as well. There's something else called 5-LOX. You can inhibit that. Apparently, these compounds in willow bark also modulate or regulate these other cytokines like IL-1, 6, 8, and 10, as well as creating a decrease of other things that create inflammation, like the tumor necrosis factor and the NF-kappa B. These are just things that create more inflammation. Willow bark can inhibit or help modulate all of those factors. In one study, it was shown that willow bark was as effective in reducing inflammation as aspirin. I mean, to me, that's very surprising that this information is not broadly promoted. Of course, I know why, but I think you need to know about it. It also does other things. It helps to reduce white blood cell reactions, and it has a potent effect of lowering cytokines, which are those things that create inflammation. Now, sometimes you have to increase the dose and take it for a little bit longer, but it has virtually no side effects unless you have an allergy to it. And you can also take willow bark for gout as well, which is a big problem for many people. But now let's talk about some other things you can do if you potentially have some type of gene issue. Now, again, just because your genes are altered doesn't mean you're going to have more inflammation or pain, especially if you don't have the triggers, like you've never been injured, you don't experience stress,
you never have any losses in your life, your diet's perfect, you have no nutritional deficiencies, and you've never taken an antibiotic. So that being said, I don't think we're going to find anyone in that situation. Personally, I've had so many old injuries. I mean, just crazy amount of injuries. I've been under massive stress. My diet has sucked for well over half of my life. I've had many, many doses of antibiotics. So these are some things that I would recommend to do, generally speaking, okay? Make sure that you have enough omega-3 fatty acids, and at the same time, you must avoid the omega-6 fatty acids. I have a lot of videos on this, but the cod liver oil is a really good omega-3 fatty acid because it gives you vitamin D and vitamin A as well. But sometimes you have to take omega-3 for a good amount of time if you're very deficient. So it could take months, potentially even a few years, if you are very, very deficient, to replenish the omega-3 fatty acids and get this ratio back in check. Now, the second most important thing is this vitamin D. I've done videos on this, and a small amount of vitamin D, especially if you have a genetic problem, is not going to cut it. You need at least 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 international units or even more for some people, because out of all the natural nutrients, vitamin D is the most potent anti-inflammatory and anti-pain, especially if you have lower back pain or any type of chronic pain or chronic inflammation that comes from autoimmune diseases. Going on a low carb is very, very important too, because the more carbs you have in the diet, the more inflammation you are going to have. Doing moderate exercise, okay, not overtraining. Tai Chi is good. Yoga is great. Anything low intensity. Aquatic exercises are really good too. Magnesium is another important remedy, but you can get that in consuming a good amount of vegetables. The vegetables alone have all sorts of anti-inflammatory phytonutrients. Then we have this genetic problem of methylation, which I'm not going to get into in this video, but just realize that if you have a problem with methylation, you are going to have more inflammation. You won't be able to detoxify. You might be depressed. And so this can be easily prevented if you take folate, methylcobalamin, which is a B12, and you take choline, and you take B1, the natural version, not the synthetic versions. It can greatly assist in your genes and make them work right, so you can eliminate inflammation and pain and a lot of other problems. Regular intermittent fasting and periodic prolonged fasting, dynamite for inflammation and pain. I mean, if you just did that alone, you'd probably completely get rid of your pain. Why? Because all these pro-survival genetics enzymes kick in when you stop eating. I mean, it's just quite remarkable. Your immune system starts getting really, really strong. Infrared is a great therapy. You can get all sorts of infrared therapy type pads or lasers that have a huge effect on pain, and it will also increase melatonin, which will help you systemically with many other problems, including sleeping. Probiotics, okay, very important, especially for pain. A lot of people have inflammation because their gut isn't right. And I'm talking about the microbiome. Getting more diversity in your microbes can greatly drop inflammation, a lot of times down to zero. And of course, you're going to have to avoid certain things that are irritating your colon, like gluten and grains, but a probiotic can greatly help you. Cold water therapy, whether it's a cold shower or an ice bath or cryotherapy. I did a video on this topic, and I talked about if you have an acute injury and you apply cold, that might not be the best action because you're getting rid of the healing response. But if that inflammation is turned chronic, it's inappropriate, cold therapy is a good thing. Cold shower, it might be very uncomfortable. But if you have a B1 deficiency, your tolerance for cold goes way, way, way down. So you might need B1 so you can get enough nerve up to take that cold shower, but it can greatly help inflammation. And of course, the other obvious thing is avoiding alcohol, smoking, things like that. Just as a side note, there are many, many natural remedies that are COX-2 inhibitors, okay, like turmeric, for example. But turmeric also does a lot of other things too. It can act in a similar mechanism to cortisol.
without the side effects. In one study, it was shown that the active ingredient in turmeric, curcumin, was as effective as another anti-inflammatory called phenylbutazone, which, if I'm not mistaken, that's taken off the market in the US and the UK. Bromelain is that enzyme in pineapple that also can greatly help you with inflammation. It's a natural anti-inflammatory. It's also really good for sinus congestion. Another one, boswellia, is a great COX-2 inhibitor that too can mimic steroids but without the side effects. Now, I've done videos on some really amazing things you can do for pain as well that just use acupressure. And if you have not seen my videos on that, you have to check this out. I put this video up right here.
OK，今天还有一点点放松肌肉，看一下哈。那今天真的从这一个，我今天第一次听到说柳树皮啊，柳树皮就是阿司匹林里面的那些成分。他说那柳树皮又可以止痛又可以消炎哈。放松肌肉第几个？放松肌肉。这个
The question is how to relax. Sounds easy, but actually, for some people, it's very, very difficult. Getting your body in a relaxed state can greatly not just help you sleep, but it can help endurance. If you're an athlete, many athletes out there, especially the top ones, actively practice relaxing, and it really helps their performance. It can help their speed, their reaction time, and in general, the more you relax, the better concentration you're going to have, the more focus you'll have, the better you can learn. So relaxation is something that is really not emphasized enough. Most people go through life one big ball of stress. And I'm going to actually put you through a little exercise to help you. And I recommend you actively do this on a regular basis. Question is, where do you hold your tension? Is it in your back, in your chest, in your head? We'll go through that. So you're probably seated right now, which is perfect. So I'm going to walk you through this exercise. We're going to be going through your body and helping you relax every single part. And then what you want to do is maintain that new level of relaxation through various activities, whether it's driving down the street, going through a stressful situation, going to work. But I'm not saying drop your production. You just want to relax while you're working, while you're driving, and you're going to sleep much better. All right, the first thing we're going to do while you're sitting there, I want you to take all the tension out of your forehead, all the wrinkles, the creases. Relax your forehead, okay? Just let it go. Now, what about your scalp? Is there any tension in your scalp? Relax your scalp. Just let it go. Relaxation is kind of just doing nothing. You're not focusing on anything specifically. You're just letting it go. All right, now let's talk about your eyes. There's quite a few muscles around the eyes. Relax all of the muscles around the eyes and just let the eyes go limp in their sockets. Good, you got that? Good. Try to relax it more. Just let it go and just melt those muscles. All right, let's talk about the breathing. You want to slow down your breath and have a nice equal breathing in and breathing out. And as you breathe out, just relax your chest. All right, now let's talk about your jaw. The jaw muscles probably are going to be holding the most tension of your entire body. So I want you just to relax your jaw muscles, let them go to the point where your mouth actually opens. Can you do that? You're going to find that your upper back starts to relax when your jaw is relaxed. So many people are grinding their teeth at night and they're holding so much tension in their jaw. So even when you actually eat, you want to relax your jaw muscles because that's where a lot of tension builds up. All right, now let's relax your lips. and your tongue. And then let's relax the neck. Let's start with the front of the neck. Any tension going on with the front of the neck, just let it go. All right, now let's go to the back of the neck. This is where a lot of people have a lot of tension, so just let it go and relax the back of your neck. And then the upper shoulders, the trapezius muscles. That's the muscles on the top of the shoulders. Let's start with the right side. Just let that muscle go. Just pretend like it's melting right now. All right, let's do the right arm. Let's do the bicep. That's the muscle in the front part. Now let's do the back part. That's a tricep. Just let it go. And then the forearm. Just relax your right hand. Let's do the left trap and shoulder right now. Just let it go. Relax it. All right, now the upper arm muscle called the bicep. That's in the front part. Let that thing go. And then let go of the tricep. That's the back part. Just allow it to melt. And then the left forearm. Just relax those muscles. And then relax the left hand. So now your upper body should be very, very nice, relaxed. But let's go to the front part of the chest. All the muscles in between the rib cage, just let them go as you're breathing slowly in and out. All right, let's talk about the stomach. So many people are holding in their stomach all day long because they don't want it to protrude. But in this exercise, I want you just to let it go and let your stomach go out and just relax all the muscles superficially and deeper, okay, right around the stomach area and the lower abdomen. Let's go to the back, the mid-back. You have different muscles that are around the scapula. Let those go and just relax those muscles. If you feel like slouching, go right ahead. Now, don't put too much effort into relaxation because that's going to tense you up. We're trying to just maintain regular, slow breathing and relax all of your muscles. And as you breathe out, try to relax more of these muscles even more. All right, now let's go to the lower back. This is a common area where there's a lot of stress. Try to just let those muscles go. You have muscles that come up. You got muscles on the inside. You have muscles that come around at the top of the buttocks muscle. You have all sorts of internal muscles to just melt those muscles. Let them go. Take all the tension out of that low back. If you have pain, your pain will probably be going away while you're doing this. Any tension that you have anywhere in that area, just allow it to let go. You got that? All right, we're gonna go down the right leg, okay, and hip. On the front part of the thigh, just relax that part of the body and let it go. Let's go to the back of the leg on the right side, the hamstring. Allow that to totally relax so there's no tension in that upper leg. Now let's relax the calf and the front part of your shin, right below the knee. Just let that go. Now let's relax your foot and all of your toes. Just allow that area of your body to completely let go. All right, now let's go to the left side of the body, starting with the upper thigh, and relax that muscle. It's called the quadriceps. Let that thing relax. Good. Now let's go to the back part of the leg and do the hamstring. Just allow it to let go and relax 100%. Good. Moving right down, we got the calf. Let the calf relax fully. If there's any tension in there, just relax it. Then go right to the front part of your thigh and let that go. Good. Now let's go down to the foot. Let your foot and the toes just totally melt and relax. So you should now be in a very comfortable state of well-being, fully relaxed. And I'd highly recommend you make a habit of doing this every single day until it's an automatic thing that you can maintain this level of relaxation through the day, and especially before you go to bed at night. You're going to find your sleeping is going to improve, you're going to feel healthier, and you're going to actually have a lot less stress. All right, do you feel more relaxed now? This is a very important state to be in. So the more stress you go through, the more you should maintain that overall body relaxation to keep your stress lower, to counter the stress. But the key is maintaining it. All right, go ahead and comment down below, and I will see you in the next video. So if you want more knowledge on how to create a healthy
OK，今天感恩大家，感恩所有上瘾女人没有舍弃我们。你看，我们从这个 免疫系统这一块，从说荨麻疹，然后牵出自体免疫系统的好多疾病呢，好多都是这一块的。然后现在知道了，我们在饮食上面可以改变，可以止痛，可以消炎，然后放松。哇，真的一连串的这个博威医生呢，太善巧了。好，我们今天时间到了，感恩大家的陪伴，明天见，See you tomorrow，感恩。